Good to see you guys. My name's Dusty. I'm one of the pastors. This is going to be our last Revelation sermon for this fall, and then we're going to pick back up in January. We're about to kick off Advent. Now, we try to follow like truly established morality, and we don't do like Christmassy things before Thanksgiving's had its day, you know what I mean? Although, never mind the Christmas trees out there, that's for serving people in our community. But anyways, so, and even a note on that, like I hope to, just to let you know where things are at, even in terms of my health and all that, that a couple of weeks ago, we found out on a PET scan that I was in remission, and almost felt a little bit like George W. Bush whenever we did Iraq, and he was on the aircraft carrier, and he was like, mission accomplished. And it was like, well, maybe not, because a few days later, we ended up getting a bone marrow biopsy that showed some concerning cells there. But we just found out, like at the very end of the week, while I was driving to my youngest son's football game, no cancer in that deal. So my plan is, thank you, I'm really excited about that. A really big deal. So the plan is to be a full go in January. And so some of you may be like, oh, dang it, we kind of like Keenan and BG, but we're all going to be into this together. So anyways, but I'm super fired up. When I see you again in January up here, we're going to be rolling through Revelation, picking up in chapter 9. But love you guys. Let's do this. So we're picking up here, and I'm going to put up an image on the screen from a few weeks ago. So what you've got is a scroll that was language from back in chapter 5, and a scroll that would represent, in a symbolic way, God's unfolding judgment and the restoration of the world that was bought through Jesus' death and resurrection that will be made full whenever he returns. And there's a scroll, and then on that scroll, there are 7 seals. And so along the way of what we've been hearing over the last few weeks would be, Brandon in chapter 6. And then, a couple weeks ago in chapter 7, we just took them out of order because Andy Campman was in town, is the imagery is of imagine Jesus with like a letter opener kind of thing and kind of popping. He's the only one that could do it, the only one worthy, popping each one of these seals, so that representing now the scroll is going to be unrolled, and the judgment and the restoration of the world is going to unfold. So that's the image of what's in your head whenever you hear in just a moment these seals. And something I've talked about when I've been up here is just think Narnia with all this. You've got imagery oftentimes from the Old Testament, and that's intended, you're not going to learn anything new from the book of Revelation, but in terms of like a new doctrine, like we knew Jesus is returning, we knew he would judge the world, we knew that God is just. But it's intended to stir our imagination and to impact us in a way at a spiritual, emotional, and intellectual level in a way that's unique, maybe that, like a New Testament epistle or even Jesus' Gospels. It's just a different way of saying it to move us and to call us into response. So even some of these things are along those lines. So what I want to do is I actually want to reread what Leanne read to us just a moment, but I want you just to enter into the closet with the wardrobe, and then through the back of that wardrobe, you're going to step out onto a forest and a new world, and just imagine a little bit. That's what is supposed to be happening, and imagine the scene of John's vision that he's reporting to us in Revelation. So here we go. When the Lamb opened the 7 seals, so again, that's the last seal, and then the scroll. The scroll is about to be unrolled. When the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. So just imagine that. Imagine pop, and then everyone, like there's a gasping maybe, and no one says anything. And not for 10 seconds. We're not real good at silence, culturally. But imagine nobody scrolling on their phones, nothing. A complete silence for half an hour. Maybe John, the only thing John can hear is his breathing that's probably fairly rapid. He can maybe even hear his heart beat. But everyone just is silent because they know what's about to kind of pop off on this whole deal. Then I saw the 7 angels. So after maybe a half hour of silence after that 7th seal is broken, then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. So imagine that scene. You got these angels, each one given a trumpet. Then another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it on the earth, and there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of light, and an earthquake. So if you're trying to figure out what a censer is, this is probably the best way to think of it. So it looked like something like this. Again, if we need to think about it as a essential oil diffuser, then that would kind of catch the basic idea. But this is what it would look like. And the smoke, the vapors coming out from that would represent the prayers of the saints. And it would probably come back to BG's sermon last week, that in chapter 6, it talked about you have these martyrs that for the Christian faith that have been killed for their faith, which is exactly what was happening in a lot of these churches that John was writing to in the first century. And what it said in chapter 6 was, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood, essentially? Like, we've been killed unjustly, and are you going to do anything about that? How long, O Lord? I made a case back in chapter 5 because it was the same imagery was used of incense rising to God, that I think even more broadly, even beyond martyrdom, I think that you could include just suffering Christians that are going through life and pain and loss, where we say, how long, O Lord? Have you seen what's happening? Have you seen what's happened to me? Have you seen what's happened in the world? And we've suffered, and a lot of it has been really hard. And in this incense that we were learning, it's just imagery again. We've walked through the wardrobe out into the forest in Narnia, and there's this new world, and you have these images and silence, and this censer is brought in front of God the Father, and these prayers of the saints over 2,000 years, including yours, of, Lord, this is hard. I don't know if I've got the strength for this, have billowed up to him, and he's heard them, all right? And now it's time for action. And you have this image of the angel, fills it with fire and throws it to the earth, and just that kind of deal. And it's just a sign of, okay, it's time. It's time to make this right. And it's time to judge sin, and it's time to judge the world, and it's also time to restore things. And just, I don't know if you've ever been in a serious, again, this imagery here, and even the sights and sounds you're supposed to imagine. You ever been really close to a clap of lightning? You ever been really close to one of those deals? I mean, it's kind of pretty whenever you see these West Texas storms, maybe not the haboob part, but off in the distance, and you see a thunderhead, and oh, isn't that pretty? And pinks and blues and all this. If you've ever had a flash bang, your prayer life, really takes a step forward. I remember one time on a backpacking trip, I was at a camp in nearly 12,000 feet, miles and miles in the backcountry. So there wasn't let's go back to the car kind of thing. You just had to wait it out. We were just above tree line, and I mean, I legitimately could have read a book with the light that was in my tent overnight, with all the lightning everywhere, horizontal and all this stuff. And really, I prayed more intensely that night than I have at any point through my cancer journey. I mean, it was really incredible. But that's what is supposed to, as we imagine, we're supposed to imagine those kind of moments of a bit of the intensity and even fear of what's going on here, and it's all about to happen. So now let's pick up with the seven trumpets. In verse 6, it says, now the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared to blow them. Again, we're just invited into this imagery of this judgment that's happening. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. So again, in this Narnia image here, you've got the angel that's blasting the trumpet here after the seventh seal has been broken. And really what a student of the Bible that has read some of it, what you would think of when you see this language is, and again, John is importing so much in his Narnia world that he's building, that he isn't building it from scratch, that he's pulling Old Testament imagery into what he's doing here. So, over the last few chapters, lots of Daniel, lots of Ezekiel. Well, here, this would make the reader think, man, this is just like when Moses was in these encounters with Pharaoh in the Old Testament, and God's people, Israel, were enslaved in Egypt, and he was having these encounters between, the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt, and where there are these plagues, one after another, and he's like, hey, let my people go, and there are these plagues, with Passover being the last one, and all culminating into this real showdown between the one true God and these other deities of Egypt. And all this imagery here is pulling from that, with the hail and the fire mixed with blood. You'll see this through these trumpets today. As far as the proportions of a third, that will be a theme that you'll see in the next few verses. That I think it's wise to not see this as like literal, like, that he looks at a third of the trees and is like, okay, that hit the mark, and now, the rest of the trees make it. But more of just a sense of, like, God's judgment will be sweeping and extensive, but not complete. That's the point of all of these things. It'll say, a third were destroyed, but, that means 2/3 were not, is that God was preserving and not having a complete judgment, but there was a judgment on the world that was substantial and sweeping. That's kind of the point of what we're going to see here. Now, let's pick up in verse 8. And again, you'll see all sorts of imagery that will be pulling from the showdown in Egypt. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into a sea, and a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So this one would make you think of maybe a cross between, some of the plagues of Egypt, where the river Nile and other bodies of water were turned into blood, and all these things, that affected the fish that were in them, and et cetera. It would remind you of that, and maybe a cross between like a volcano, and this great mountain burning with fire just thrown into the sea. And that would be some of the imagery that's being pulled from here. Again, a third of the world is finding judgment, but there's a good chunk that are preserved as well. Verse 10, third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. And again, this is similar to the previous two trumpet blasts, where judgment's coming to the earth, but there's also a preservation in the middle of that. And the wormwood likely should be understood in the way that the Old Testament, that he didn't just invent this term, that it's used in Jeremiah 9:15, also in the plagues of Egypt, and it would just mean bitter water that was not great for drinking, etc. There was a bitterness there, and it caused sickness and other things along those lines. And it's just pulling from that image that it's like what happened in Egypt and even other times in Israel's history. Verse 12. And the fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. So same deal. So you have these proportionality of a third faced judgment, but then it was not complete, and it's a third judgment of the world. Verse 13, and this is where we wrap up in this passage. Then I heard, and I looked, and again, think Narnia, I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice. So there's talking creatures in Narnia, so you can just kind of enter into this world and imagine it, an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead. Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blasts of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. So woe indeed, that there's a woe coming to the world. We'll pick up in that in January about some of that unfolding judgment as it's described with the imagery that's there. But there's a judgment that's really serious on humanity. So what I want to do is, that's the passage. We all clear on that? So in this Narnia world where we go through the closet into this new world, and a whole new world with talking creatures, and we imagine the scene, and we see through this imagery that God has heard our cries and heard the saints for years say how long this world is really broken. When are you going to come fix it? When are you going to avenge what's broken? And he's like, I'm hearing every one of those prayers, and now it's time to act. It's time to bring justice to this world and bring healing and restoration at the same time. So what I want to do is, that's the passage. What I want to do is, I just want to spend a few moments talking about why judgment is that. I think that a lot of us it can be really confusing. And a lot of us have even had some really negative experiences with it. Like I've got a family member who a while back we're talking, and at this point, he's not, living his life as a Christian. And I was talking with him the other day, and he said that one of the things that really turned him off as an adult was thinking back to his time as a kid, and he went to a church that was really into Revelation. I'm like, well, we're into Revelation, but some churches are really into Revelation, and like really, really into it. And it's like every week, and like you better this, or here's the judgment that's coming, and you're going to be left behind, and no one's going to cook your food, and it's going to be terrible, that kind of thing. And he was in a church that, he'd go to with a friend to a church that he would hear all the time, and the judgment was just like the thing. And even the prevailing thought was about Jesus is you need to believe in Jesus, and yeah, it'll be great, and he's good and all that. I mean, maybe, but mostly you need to avoid this terrible judgment that's coming. And that was the main message that he heard, right or wrong. That's the message he heard. And so I think a lot of us have like a real bitter taste in our mouth about hearing about judgment in churches in the past and from Christians. And so like you hear this kind of stuff and you're like, yeah, this is kind of like triggering of why I like stepped away from so much of this stuff. And then others of us know, like biblically, it's there that judgment and justice are biblical ideas, but we're a little bit embarrassed about it. Like you've got good friends that are very sincere in their beliefs that are not Christians, and you're like, man, for real? Like there's a judgment coming against them, and that there's only one way through Jesus, his death and resurrection, through the Bible, is God's revealed word. And that judgment sometimes just weighs heavy on us. And so, like, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about why judgment, and even if there could even be something good and beautiful for us to latch onto, because this is we're going to be in this kind of swimming through this water for like several chapters, really, until we get into the late teens. There's a lot of imagery around the judgment of the world. And so I want to use, as a starting part of this conversation, look at a passage in Exodus 2, because there's been so much Egypt and Moses and plagues imagery in what John has done in Revelation 8. I thought it might be really interesting about after all that stuff has happened, or really on the front end of all of it's happening, but reflecting on what had led up to that. Exodus 2, 23 through 25. I love this passage. This is maybe we taught through Exodus and Genesis a few years back. And this was like, these verses here had such an impact on me. Here's what, in reflection, leading up to this great exodus that happens in Egypt. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. All right, so there's this cry out. It's kind of like the incense that there was all over centuries even, that there had been people saying, Lord, help us. How long? How long? Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. So again, think about that censer and the incense, the prayers coming to the Father, hearing every one of them. And listen to this. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. All right, this is really significant. Those four things, I love that. So I'm not going to preach a whole sermon on that, but he heard, he remembered, he saw, he knew. All right, so that's in Exodus. He's responding to his people, their mistreatment, the unjust treatment from the Egyptians towards them, and God saw all of it, and he remembered the covenant he made with them, and he was going to act. He knew all of it, and it was really storing up wrath in the form of those plagues, and then ultimately in the Passover and their release from slavery. All right, so God heard their cries for a long time. And here's the thing, in a lot of ways, this is something I love about Advent that we will pick up again after Thanksgiving this week, is something I love about Advent is here in a nutshell is what Christians are doing during the Advent season. Is Advent just means coming. And that for Israel, for centuries, the prayer was, Lord, when are you going to come release us, from slavery in Egypt, or even oppression in their land from the Babylonians, from the Assyrians, from the Romans? How long, Lord? When are you going to send your Messiah? When are you going to fix this? And so that's where Israel was for a long time. Now we're on the other end of the cross. So Jesus has come, God's Messiah. He's died, he's been resurrected. So we get to experience this and enjoy the redemption that has been purchased. But in so many ways, we're still in a really broken world. It's still really messed up, you may have noticed. There's still all sorts of sad things. There's car accidents. there's relational rifts, there's disease, the impact of sin, there is betrayal, and the kind of things that sexual assault, I mean, we could go on, the kind of things that have been experienced in this room alone, forget like the world, but let's just talk about in this room, the kind of things that some of you have walked through. Really all of us have, but some of you will walk with a limp forever with what you've experienced. And sometimes we can just wonder, because maybe some of the people that did these things to you just seems like there was no real accountability, that maybe there was no prison term, or they just rolled right along with their life and everything was just fine, and it didn't seem like anyone cared. And you've talked to the Lord about this, and you're frustrated at him because it seems like this person did this and they just got away with it, and all of these things just happen. And so in so many ways, that's why we sing songs like "Oh Come Emmanuel," because yes, you've come and you've died and you've been resurrected, but here we are, and I experienced this evil, and sometimes I've committed evil, and we're waiting for you to fix it. And how long, O Lord? Oh, come Emmanuel, come and ransom captive Israel. It just so happens that's us. We now sit in that seat. And so there is this component of judgment that is addressing that very thing that you've already experienced. And you've seen evil, you've experienced evil, you've even done evil. And what is the Lord going to do in response to that? I would add that most of us have an underdeveloped, I would say in general, most of us in this room, and I would say most moderns in general, have an underdeveloped sense of God's justice. Just in general, we have an underdeveloped sense of God's justice, that I think we have a pretty healthy understanding of God's love, although we still struggle to believe it, and we need to continue to wrestle with that reality too. These aren't opposite realities, they're twin realities. In fact, along with several other attributes of who God is God is gracious and kind for sure, and also just and holy, all at the same time. He's all of that at once and doesn't pick and choose between these things. And I think that we can really struggle with it. I even think how most of us conceive of sin, how we think of it, is sometimes I mess up. And even this week, I think I just realized in real time how big of a deal it was. On Tuesday at college gathering, I had the opportunity to speak, and I was talking about dumb things that I do, and I told them that I'd poured Amy's, she just had started some sourdough, a little starter thing, and I poured it, I thought it was waffle batter, really, because she was out of town on a work trip. I poured it down the sink, and there was collective gasps in the crowd, and I realized I'd committed violence, and I think a lot of us, even how we view sin is we're I poured the sourdough down there, and sometimes, mistakes were made. Mistakes were made. Maybe not by me, but mistakes were made. And where we have a hard time just acknowledging that a biblical category like sin is not saying mistakes were made. It's no, I wanted to do it my way. God has spelled out how to do it, and I didn't want to do it his way. And I don't honor him as I should. I don't trust him as I should. I don't love him as I should. And I do things my own way. I rebel against him. And we can really struggle with even just owning that is a category and that's a thing. And furthermore, I'll tell you a really interesting trend I've seen over the years is no shade at all if you're struggling intellectually with the faith. I'm the king of that I've struggled intellectually with the faith my whole Christian life and have really wrestled with the truths of the Bible. If that's in your spot, then come talk. I'd love to talk through some of my experiences with that. So I'm with you on that deal, and by God's grace, he moves me forward. But I have observed another thing that's happened a lot for folks that kind of end up in a deconstruction type mode where they walk away from the faith. Is I can't tell you how many times that I see it playing out where someone really wants to do something or not do something, or maybe they've got a political ideology that they've constructed, and then they look up and their political ideology or something they really want to do is incompatible with the Bible's teachings on something, and because they really want to do that thing or not do that thing or believe in this way, they walk away from that because it's incompatible, with their new sense of belief or action that they want to have. And again, I think a lot of us are going to look at that and go, well, God's gracious and whatever. And without a real sense of but what about God's justice and even judgment and his holiness? There's a component of that. And before, it seems like I'm being too hard on this. I can tell you, even in my own mind all the time, that whenever I sin, I come up real quick with on-the-fly justification of, I know I shouldn't, but, it's really tough to be me. It's really tough, really hard to be me, and God will understand, and plus the cross, and it's kind of pulling on some things that are true, is God is very long-suffering, slow to anger, abounding in love, all true. And you use those things as fuel to disobey him. It's just really an interesting place to land. And so we can underestimate God's justice and holiness all the time. So let me offer 4 reasons in conclusion why judgment, while I know it's harsh and it can be scary, is actually part of good news for us, that I want to just throw out these 4 things, why it can be good news for us. Number one, God is holy and unchangeable. And this is really good news. Our world's even morals and things that it values change over time. I mean, you can look even in the last few years. You could say there was a time where I would say in general, culturally, like even on something like race, that everything was racist like 5, 6, 7 years ago. And now you're not only allowed to talk about racism, it's like kind of shifted in terms of the general pulse of society. And it's just interesting. It's like, well, what's the stance? And where are we at on that? There are some cultures that have a major problem with the exclusivity of Christianity. There are other places that really struggle with the fact that other people outside of the us's of the world get to be included in this whole thing. And you could do this about a million different things, but it's actually really good news to know that God is not shifting with culture. God is not shifting moment by moment and changing his opinion based on, people don't really like that anymore. So I'm going to kind of soften my stance, but we can be confident in him, be confident in who God is, that he's unchangeable and he is holy, he is different. His otherness is on display. Number 2, another thing that's really good news is God is not indifferent to humanity's evil. Whenever we talked a second ago about the terrible evil that's been experienced in this room, that theft and genocide and adultery and rape and whatever. I mean, you could talk about abortion. You could talk about any kind of evil that you want to talk about has been done, and that we've done some of those things. We've experienced some of those things. God is not shrugging to this because of his holiness and justice. That God cares about that, and I hope you even feel seen and even experience the love of God through his justice to the world. That when you've experienced hard things, God sees, knows, remembers, hears, all of that, and he will act. That part of Revelation, keep in mind, is all to encourage struggling, suffering saints in the first century all the way through now, that he sees it and he knows it and he's going to fix it and he's going to make it right. And so, yes, the restoration is good news, but even the judgment and the justice that sin will face in front of God is a really big deal. Number 3, it serves as a warning. It serves as a warning. And this is a gracious thing that, again, we are all so easily entangled in sin, is the language of Hebrews. And like I just said, for me, I can self-deceive in just a moment by moment, like real quick, come up with a thought that's compatible with the thing that I want to do on why it's fine, even though I know it's in the Bible and I'm not unclear on what's there. And that can develop into longer patterns. It can develop into walking away from the faith. And this serves as a little warning to us of like, hey man, check yourself. That little small steps of rebellion and thinking it's fine, and even using God's grace as a reason why you're going to rebel against him, that this is a little bit of a bucket of ice water to the face about like, hey, wake up on this deal. This is God's kindness to you saying, you're going in a direction that isn't good for you. It's dishonoring to the Lord. This is a warning. And the way we tend to walk away from God is not in some dramatic step, some big real revelation. It's usually step by step, week over week, month over month, year over year, a million small steps. And this can be a warning to you when you see it in Revelation of like, hey man, check it. And even another case for this is think back to earlier in Revelation where those passages were unfolding to those 7 churches. That's one of the things is like, hey, you need to wake up and you've lost your first love. And I know you're doing all the things. You're going to church every week, but your love for me has grown cold, and even some specific actions they had. So it serves as a warning. Number 4, and finally, the cross pops. All right, so there's a pop out to us of the cross of Jesus. If we really buy into the fact that God is just and he's holy, all of a sudden the cross now kind of makes sense, because it really doesn't make sense apart from this. It's like, no, but Jesus loves us and that's why he died on the cross. It's like, okay, yes, but why that? Like, why did God have to come die just to show us he loved us? That's like a bit extreme. He could have done something else to us. He could have sent that like a really cool AI-generated Hallmark movie. He could have done a lot of things that would have been really helpful for us. And where he meets us in Christmas in a mountain town. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways he could have done this. But here, what he did instead is he died on a cross. And why? Romans 3, 23 through 26. Maybe my favorite passage in the whole Bible. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's that starting point. And are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation. That's like an atonement like of God's wrath towards sin by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness because in his divine forbearance, he had passed over former sins. It was to show his righteousness at the present time. So listen to this. So the cross, all this, we're sinners. Jesus dies. There's an atonement of the wrath of the Father so that, here's the result of this, he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So why the cross? Is because God didn't set his holiness and justice aside so we could go to heaven. And so he can make things new. That's not how it worked. He can't do that and be God. God maintains his justice. But at the cross, through his death and resurrection, all of God's anger that should have been poured out on us for the evil we've committed hasn't just been done to you, it's also been performed by you, right? That these were all, for all of the believers in Jesus, all of God's wrath and judgment and justice were poured out on God the Son, Jesus. And he absorbed the wrath that should have been yours. So God remained just, but also was able to justify you and make you right with the Father. So, therefore, the cross is really good news, man. So when we read all these things of the third of the world getting judged and turning water turned into blood and all of this judgment, we think to ourselves, be careful, sin is a really serious deal, but praise God that judgment that should have been poured out on me because I have sinned against God, that all is true, was poured out on God the Son, Jesus Christ, at the cross, and then through his resurrection from the dead. I don't need to fear judgment. I know that it's real. He sees what happens. He hears it. He knows it. He's going to act. He's also going to act on the full restoration of the world, and I get to be part of that because of the cross. So, judgment is scary, yes, terrifying in many regards for many. However, for the Christians, somehow we are safe and we are seen by God. And judgment is shockingly good news for the world, and even a call to today to believe based on the mercy of God, a way of escape that's provided. Lord, would you let every person in here experience your grace and even being seen by you for the avenging of what's been wrong and wrongs that have been done by them. But Lord, thank you, the wrongs that we have done, you've answered fully through your cross, through your resurrection. Lord, thank you that sin will be judged finally and removed finally from this world, and a new world restored by your grace awaits. Lord, what good news. In Jesus' name, amen.